lawless execution of Gaddafi, the long-term leader of Libya, and discredited the R2P in the Syrian civil war context because there was no trust any longer on the part of China and Russia above all. But I think with the unified sense of this Gaza emergency and reality and the degree of mobilization of civil society, R2P is an instrument that can be refashioned for a constructive use as a humanitarian tool, and one which can, in addition to relieving the emergency, also function to promote Palestinian realization of their basic rights, including the right of self-determination.
Thank you.
Hello, this is Feyza from Turkey Today. Thank you so much for your statement. If you'd allow me, I have two questions. You have mentioned that we have reached a climax of this conflict or genocide. What makes you think that this exact point is the climax? Couldn't it get worse, or wasn't it worse before? And my second question would be, what do you think there's a list here of actions that can be done to help people in Gaza. Which one do you think should be prioritized or should be done first? Thank you.
This is the climax.
Yes. Of course, critics of what has been happening in Gaza have pointed prematurely to a climax over these 22 plus months. So I do so with a certain hesitation, because it is possible, as your question suggests, that worse is still to come in terms of the forced dispossession of the surviving Gazan population, which has certainly been speculated, and the total Israeli occupation, the failure to treat Palestinians as entitled to protection in their own homeland, that there is that nightmare scenario that could lead us to say this wasn't the ultimate crisis, but just a severe stage in the genocidal process. But I think it's sufficiently severe that it's correct to view it as an emergency, given the widespread malnutrition, traumatization of the entire population, and the fact that we don't know, we don't have, fortunately, there's not much experience of how far a people under this sort of intense 24/7 kind of pressure, military, constant drone and other forms of military attack. How long can a population withstand that kind of experience? So we, of the Gaza Tribunal, feel that this is an emergency, and maybe it isn't the ultimate climax. That remains to be seen, but it's certainly a climax in terms of humanitarian urgency.
So, very small place in Gaza. It's only 40 kilometers
Yes.
square. 1 million people squeezed.
Yeah, it's ironic. I've been to Gaza several times, and it's ironic that Gaza was one of the most crowded places in the world before all of this crisis unfolded. So you can only imagine what it means to constantly move the population around, destroy 85% of their residential facilities. People have no homes. The weather is either too hot or too cold, and they don't have access to healthy water, diseases of various sorts, from malnutrition, from this undrinkable water, from open sewage, and it's a total nightmare experience that was always viewed as something that was forcing the population to live at a subsistence level. So now one's driven by the harshest means the people of Gaza to something far below a subsistence level. And we really don't know, we don't have the experience of what that will eventuate in, what will be the real outcome in terms of human development.
Actions priority. Second question.
Well-
Second question. Actions priority.
Oh, yes. I think that the most tangible and significant action priority would be an extension of the arms embargo, because that's what enables Israel to embark on not only the violence in Gaza, but in the regional violence. And there's speculation at the present time that a second Iran war will again be provoked by Israel as a way of distracting attention from what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank, which is part of the picture of this present emergency, but it hasn't been the focus of the Gaza Tribunal for obvious reasons, that the genocide has been focused on Gaza, and the spillover from it is being experienced by settler violence in the West Bank and efforts to dispossess as many Palestinians as possible and have them leave. The ultimate objective of the Zionist project is to stabilize Jewish supremacy and to minimize the physical presence and political resistance of the Palestinian people whose homeland this is.
Hello, good morning. It's Sudasim from Apaçık Radio. I have a question regarding your words, the seeking of activism to change governmental stance from the people and the individuals. What would that entail, and how could it be enforced? Thank you.
Well, I gave as the example what was done in response to South African apartheid racism. The situation is different, of course, in regard to Israel in a number of fundamental ways. And one has to configure the action initiatives in relation to what is seen to be effective. And that's a matter of both speculation and some knowledge of the specifics of the situation. And it's obvious from the way Israel has tried to silence journalists and truth-telling generally that the government is exceedingly sensitive to criticism. So raising this critical awareness and making it clear that Israel is a pariah state, is an outlaw state, seems to me to be a second kind of action priority. And that means not participating with Israelis in sporting events or cultural activities, not cooperating academically or in scientific and technological projects, exerting pressure on corporations not to deal with Israel. All of these things are concrete, tangible, and doable.
Flotilla, you have mentioned flotilla, so maybe
And one thing that has captured the imagination, and Gaza Tribunal has given it a certain symbolic support, is the formation of freedom flotillas. The most publicized recent one was the Greta Thunberg, the Swedish activist, and the boat that was detained by Israel and the passenger, the activists deported, was the Malvine, and there is now underway supposedly a 40 ship flotilla with Malaysian support, and that will certainly make an important impact.
Thank you. It's Nisa from Anadolu Agency. You are calling for armed UN protective force. Given repeated Security Council deadlocks over Gaza so far, how realistic is that the General Assembly will take such drastic action? As you know, some Western democracies have recognized Palestinian statehood recently, but simultaneously cracked down on pro-Palestinian activism at home. So there is a strict contradiction. So what do you think about this situation?
Well, I think that's a very difficult question. It's as realistic as the political will that is present is motivated to really stop this genocide. And one of the ways that it could be made realistic is by exerting enough pressure on the Israeli and US governments so that they consent to a protective force being sent to Gaza. Now that seems unlikely at the moment to be realized, but the situation in Gaza is sufficiently desperate that only unlikely initiatives have any chance of really rescuing the population from near certain tragedy. And therefore, I think it is an appropriate kind of undertaking to support as a matter of conscience and to mobilize as much pressure as possible to make it realistic. Realism reflects the political atmosphere, and that can be changed by people. See, the real underlying faith of this kind of tribunal is in people, not in governments. And it hopes that the mobilization of people will have a desirable political impact, historical impact, as has happened often. I experienced the impact of the anti-war movement during the Vietnam period, which surprised many people in the US by changing what seemed like a very deep Cold War type commitment of the US government to carry on with the war. So things happen that are not predictable and seem unlikely, but are worth struggling to make happen. And I suppose that's the faith that guides the Gaza Tribunal.
Thank you.
Başka var mı? Soru yok. Buyurun.
Hi, Hazel Ward from AFP. You've spent many decades making many calls for...
Which organization?
from AFP, Hazel Ward, Agence France Presse. Professor Falk, you've spent many decades calling for action and change in Israel's attitude and actions towards the Palestinians. But you, of all people, have seen the inaction of both the UN and global governments. At this stage, what faith or what hope do you have that that can change? And secondly, I'm interested to know, you spoke about effecting change in the US and in Israel itself. There were mass protests across Israel with hundreds of thousands of people speaking out. What hope do you have that change could come from within Israel that could actually have an impact on the government's stance? Thank you.
First question, what has been changed now? You have been advocating the UN but what is right now, most recently? This is the first.
Well, the UN is a organization of states dominated, according to its charter, by the states that won World War II. The permanent members, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, which makes no sense if you really intended a framework that would privilege law, because you wouldn't make the 5 most powerful and dangerous countries having an exemption from law if you were trying to create an effective legal order. So in this sense, the UN was designed to fail in a situation where the strategic interests of these P5 actors collided with the requirements of complying with international law. So there should be no surprise. At the same time, it would be a mistake to dismiss either international law or the UN. The UN has done more than any other institutional actor in awakening people to the reality of what has been happening in Gaza. And the drama surrounding the current special rapporteur is evidence of her influence as well as of the UN's impotence when it comes to stopping the genocide. So you have the 2 realities in opposition to one another. And so we should respect the UN for making more people aware, in association, as I've been trying to say, with courageous journalists who've been reporting from Gaza and from the region in a manner that tries to break through the fog of war and the state propaganda that has been disseminated by the most influential media platforms in the West. And the same thing with international law. It's been admirably and professionally interpreted by the International Court of Justice and by the International Criminal Court, but there's an enforcement gap, and that was intended. It was intended to depend for enforcement on Security Council implementation, which means it was subject to the veto. And so the drafters of the UN Charter were persuaded to give these geopolitical actors, who are now really Russia, China, and the US, they were persuaded to give them primacy when it came to global security and war prevention. That's not really a failure of the UN. It's a characteristic of the UN as it was created and evolved. With international law, you have these authoritative decisions. The courts in the UN system and internationally can declare the law authoritatively But as matters now stand, only civil society can enforce it when it is strategically resisted. But what international law does is to lend legitimacy to these action initiatives, including the global, the Gaza Tribunal. Because law has been declared but unenforceable, such initiatives become legitimate, whereas they wouldn't be if you had no legal foundation. So although law isn't properly enforced, it legitimates informal or civil society methods of enforcement. And again, it places faith in the capabilities of people to do what governments refuse to do.
So that's the second question. U.S. and Israel, civil society, you think they can change something?
Okay. Oh, yeah. There is, in the U.S. particularly, a quite dramatic change in public opinion, including on the part of the Jewish minority, that is seeking, exerting pressure to change the policy to one that is at least balanced and non-interventionary. The difficulty is that special interests, including the profitability of corporations that have been supplying the weaponry and other kinds of technology to Israel, have a great deal of influence on the U.S. Congress. So you have two opposing forces in the U.S. You have the Congress and the White House welcoming Netanyahu as a hero of our times, honorifically, and you have civil society branding him as the most serious war criminal since Hitler. And both of those forces are in tension. How that tension will be resolved is bound up with all sorts of other issues and very complex. In Israel, you have a much less of a tension between civil society and the government. There's a lot of criticism of Netanyahu, but it again relates not so much to the treatment of the Palestinians, but of his failure to accord priority to the rescue of the Israeli hostages that were captured on October 7th. And that has created a polarization in Israel between the ultra-right religious part of the Netanyahu coalition and its secular part. And Netanyahu has consistently given in to the right and probably has sympathies with the right as well as private interests in keeping his coalition in power. So he has a combination of personal and political interests. And although some prominent Israelis have spoken out in Israel, I don't have much current confidence that that will lead to any kind of meaningful change of policy.
Ya. Tamam, biz burada bitirebiliriz. Özel röportajlar da olacak Richard Falk'ın şimdi. Başka bir şey olsa. Hepinize teşekkür ediyoruz katılmanızdan dolayı. Teşekkür.
Açıklama Türkçe, İngilizce ve diğer dillerde hem online hem de basılı olarak arz edilmiştir.